They wrote love stories for a living. They pretended to fall in love under bright lights, said lines someone else wrote, kissed on cue, and smiled when the director yelled, "Cut." And yet, for Hollywood's golden age stars, the biggest romances weren't the ones on the movie posters. They were the hidden ones, the affairs, the studios, disguised with staged photos, carefully placed rumors, and marriages that functioned more like contracts than vows. During the 1,930-second, 40-second, and 50-second, image was currency. Studios didn't just cast you, they owned you. Morality clauses sat in contracts like loaded traps. Columns, by Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, could make or unmake you with a sentence. The public didn't want complicated love. They wanted clean fairy tales. So when private lives got messy, the studios turned into cleanup crews. Babies appeared as adoptions. Lovers became family friends. Co-stars just happened to show up as each other's dates. Everyone smiled. The cameras flashed. And nothing was true. Today, we're pulling the velvet rope aside carefully, respectfully, to walk through the secret romances that shook old Hollywood to its core. Some were passionate, some destructive, some tender, and some just human. All of them reveal how far the studios would go to keep audiences in love with an illusion, and how much the stars themselves were willing to sacrifice to protect it. Let's start with a secret so tightly guarded, a child had to be adopted by her own mother. Adopted. Clark Gable, Loretta Young, and the studio's most dangerous secret. What happens when the king of Hollywood and a devout starlet fall for each other on location while he's married, and she's America's idea of virtue? In 1935, on the icy locations of The Call of the Wild, Clark Gable and Loretta Young reportedly became more than co-stars. Gable, already MGM royalty, was married. Young, just 22, had built a career on elegance and restraint. When she became pregnant, there was no safe path. An unmarried pregnancy could end her career. A public scandal could dent his. So the machine did what it was built to do. It erased reality and wrote a cleaner version. Loretta fell ill. She took a European vacation. The studio sealed doors, hushed whispers, and managed every ripple. After the birth, the baby was placed quietly in a home, and 2 years later, Loretta Young legally adopted her. The girl grew up beautiful, with features the public would later note looked hauntingly familiar. Privately, people whispered. Publicly, no one dared to confirm. Decades later, long after both stars were gone, accounts and family acknowledgments finally aligned with the whispers. The magnitude of the cover-up is still staggering. The deception wasn't born of casual cruelty. It was born of a system that calculated reputations to the decimal point. If a single truth threatened the safe image of a star, that truth was simply rewritten. If Gable and Young's story shows how far a studio would go to protect box office, the next affair shows how far two people would go to protect each other, even from the spotlight that made them legends. A Private Vow. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn's 26-year secret. Hollywood's most famous unspoken love story wasn't just a rumor. It was practically an institution. But no red carpets, no confessions, no official acknowledgement. For 26 years, when Spencer Tracy met Katharine Hepburn on Woman of the Year, 1942, the chemistry didn't need publicity. It was immediate, deep, and for the era, complicated. Tracy was a devout Catholic who remained married, though his relationship with his wife had long been distant. Divorce wasn't an option for him. That left two choices: deny the emotion or live in the shadows. They chose the shadows. The arrangement was simple and impossibly difficult. They often worked together. They often loved together. But they did not publicly exist together. Hepburn refused to speak about him in interviews. Tracy kept a low profile, sometimes retreating into isolation, wrestling with health issues, and his own deeply held beliefs. Their friends knew. Their crews knew. Hollywood knew. But without a confession in print, the truth stayed suggested, not declared. After Tracy passed in 1967, Hepburn finally spoke more openly, tenderly, respectfully about the man she loved. It wasn't scandal, as much as it was a quiet covenant, upheld for a lifetime. In a city where confessions sell papers, they chose silence. And in that silence, they built one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories, hidden in plain sight. Some secrets were quiet and loyal. Others lived at the intersection of power and myth, where romance becomes national folklore and proof is always just out of reach. The whisper that won't die. Marilyn Monroe, JFK, and RFK. It's the most famous rumored triangle in American pop culture, the world's most recognizable movie star, and two of the most powerful men in the country. By 1962, Marilyn Monroe was more than a star. She was a symbol. Her shimmering "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden didn't help tame the whispers. It supercharged them. Rumors multiplied about late-night calls, private visits, and connections that stretched to Robert F. Kennedy as well. Biographers, witnesses, and hotel staff recollections paint a collage of suggestions strong to some, flimsy to others. What's clear is that Monroe's life was a storm. Relentless attention, personal struggles, and a world of powerful figures orbiting her. What's unclear, and probably will remain so, is the exact shape and timeline of her involvement with the Kennedys. The allure of this story is the fog itself. History, even when it's incomplete, still seduces. The studios didn't control this narrative, Washington did. And when politics and motion pictures brushed shoulders at the height of the Cold War, everyone learned a new rule. Sometimes the most dangerous love stories aren't about morality clauses. They're about national image. If Monroe's rumored romances reveal the limits of what we can know, Ingrid Bergman's affair shows what happens when the truth is undeniable and the public demands punishment. Exile and Return. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. America adored her. Then she fell in love with an Italian director, and the country turned on her almost overnight. At the end of the 1942nd, Ingrid Bergman was as close to perfect as a movie star could get. Casablanca made her the face of grace and longing. Then she met Roberto Rossellini while preparing to shoot Stromboli. Their creative fascination ignited quickly into more. Bergman was married. She became pregnant. And unlike so many Hollywood secrets, this one couldn't be hidden. The reaction was ferocious. On the floor of the U.S. Senate, she was denounced as a powerful influence for evil. Church groups protested. Publicists winced. Studios closed doors. For a time, America exiled her not officially, but fully. She worked in Europe, made films with Rossellini, and lived with the consequences. Then came the second act. In 1956, Bergman returned to Hollywood and won an Academy Award for Anastasia. The crowd applauded. The years had softened the outrage, or perhaps audiences had simply realized that stars like everyone else are human. Bergman's story is a reminder. Scandal burns fast. Talent burns slow. If Bergman's affair with a director rewrote her public image, the next story follows a legend whose off-screen reputation nearly devoured the myth that made him a star. In Like Flynn, Errol Flynn, and a reputation that wouldn't behave. His name became slang for seduction. His smile should have been illegal. And his private life, even by Hollywood standards, ran hot enough to start a brush fire. Errol Flynn didn't just play charming rogues. He seemed to be one. As the swashbuckling hero of Captain Blood and the Adventures of Robin Hood, he personified mischief and daring. Off-screen, he collected stories the way some people collect stamps. Affairs with co-stars. Affairs with socialites. Affairs that worried studio executives, then made them sigh with relief when the box office receipts arrived. The phrase, "in like Flynn," drifted into the culture. A wink to his reputation. It wasn't all winks, though. Serious accusations surfaced in the early 1942nd, leading to a high-profile trial in which Flynn was ultimately acquitted. The episode didn't erase the rumors. It thickened them and complicates how his life is remembered even now. Flynn's romances weren't secret in the way others on this list were. They were spectacle. He was the public's thrilling contradiction, the hero who couldn't help being a rascal. The studios played referee, spinning as best they could. But some storms you don't control. You just ride. Not every hidden affair was all heat and headlines. Some were quiet and letter-bound, tender and brief, happening in the small spaces the studios didn't notice or pretended not to. Letters and longing. Judy Garland and Tyrone Power. She was the voice of a generation, controlled and scrutinized by her studio. He was one of the era's great leading men. Together, in secret, they found something soft in a harsh town. Judy Garland lived more of her life under supervision than most people realize. Diets monitored, sleep engineered, schedules packed by MGM until childhood blurred into obligation. Tyrone Power, handsome, magnetic, a box office favorite, existed in a different cage, freer, but still a product of his studio's careful brand building. Between them, a private romance bloomed. Their relationship remained quiet, complicated by other commitments and the realities of their careers. Surviving correspondence and accounts suggest a deep emotional connection, the kind that might have been simple in another world and another decade. It didn't last forever. Few such romances did in that era, but it existed, a rebellion of two people who wanted something their contracts didn't offer, a small corner of ordinary affection. Hollywood hid many things. The gentlest secrets often hid themselves. The next affair wasn't gentle. It was a collision of passion and power, the kind of story that changes everybody involved. Fire and fallout. Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra. She was the most desirable woman in the world. He was the voice that melted a nation. Together, they set off an explosion that singed careers and rewrote headlines. When Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra tumbled into each other's orbit in the late 1942nd, it wasn't subtle. Sinatra was married at the time. Gardner, a force of nature on screen and off, didn't do half measures. Their affair became a bonfire whispered in back rooms, shouted in headlines, debated in living rooms. Sinatra's first marriage eventually ended, and he married Gardner in 1951. Their relationship was tempestuous, magnetic, and often painful. Friends spoke of volcanic arguments and fierce reconciliations. Gardner's star kept rising. Sinatra's career for a time stumbled under the moral weight of public disapproval and industry politics. Then, almost mythically, he roared back with an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, 1953, while the marriage buckled under the strain. Their love wasn't secret for long, nor tidy once exposed. It was the opposite of the studio fairy tale. Brilliant, loud, human, and messy. If Sinatra and Gardner were a public wildfire, the next affair was a private earthquake, one that rattled a gentle star and the young actress who loved him. The Hurt You Don't See, Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal. A married icon, a rising actress, a love that never got to live out loud and left scars that never fully faded. When Gary Cooper met Patricia Neal on The Fountainhead, 1949, he was already the very definition of screen integrity. Tall, quietly emotional, American to the bone. Neal was young, gifted, and incandescent. They fell in love, and for a while, the world narrowed to two people at least in the spaces between rehearsals and hotel lobbies. But the studio system wasn't just about brand. It was about pressure. Pressure on Cooper to maintain his public image and his family life. Pressure on Neal to be the version of herself that producers could sell. Accounts from the time describe a relationship that was both intimate and impossible. She reportedly faced a heartbreaking decision related to the affair, the kind of decision women in that era shouldered in silence. The romance ended. Both carried on. Cooper remained a legend until the end of his life. Neil endured personal tragedies, made a stirring comeback, and became a model of resilience. Their story is one of those Hollywood memories without a perfect ending, just a real one. Affairs didn't just entangle actors. Sometimes they crossed into the executive suites, where power could protect a secret and then crush it. A mogul's muse, Gloria Swanson and Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Before presidents and dynasties, there was a studio mogul and a silent film goddess, and an affair that cut through business, reputation, and the birth of Hollywood power. Gloria Swanson, already a towering figure from the silent era, became involved with Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., the father of a future president, in the late 1922. He produced some of her films, and the partnership, personal and professional, burned brightly. It also burned expensively. The films didn't perform as hoped. Money vanished. Reputations frayed. The end was abrupt and bruising. Swanson was left navigating debts and rebuilding her career. Kennedy moved on, as only a man with vast resources and ambitions could. Their affair, half-whispered scandal and half-cautionary tale, foreshadowed a modern Hollywood truth. The mix of art, love, and capital almost always leaves someone with the bill. Sometimes the scandals weren't just about lovers. They were about the industry itself, which crafted illusions so elaborate they swallowed the people who wore them. The system that hid it all, and why it finally cracked. How do you keep a dozen secrets without saying a word? You build an assembly line for image, and you never, ever turn it off. The Golden Age studios had a playbook. If a star fell in love with the wrong person, you flooded the magazines with photos of them laughing with someone safe. If a pregnancy threatened a reputation, you invented a trip, then an adoption. If a gossip columnist started circling a fact you couldn't bury, you fed her too you could. Rarely did anyone print what wasn't authorized. The stakes were too high. Why did it finally collapse? The world changed. The Supreme Court loosened the studio's monopoly. Television took audiences out of theaters. The 1962nd blew holes in old ideas about morality, marriage, and what stars could admit out loud. Actors finally started owning their own images. The public, surprisingly, didn't faint. They adjusted. And in some cases, they embraced the truth. Not every secret got revealed. Some stayed with the people who lived them. But the machine that wrote official versions of life started losing ink, and the people bonus snapshots, two affairs that still echo. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier. Love, genius, and the weather in their heads. They met while both were married, on the stage in England, and their affair blazed into one of the 20th century's most famous marriages. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier fueled each other's brilliance and pain. Friends wrote about luminous highs and bitter, bewildering lows. Leigh's health struggles complicated everything. The love was real. The cost was, too. Their private weather affected the art we still revere. Charlie Chaplin and the scandals that followed him. Charlie Chaplin had a personal life that made as many headlines as his films. Romances with younger women, high-profile legal battles, and a final, stabilizing marriage to Una O'Neill. His affairs were not whispers. They were parades. The public alternated between fascination and fury. Through it all, Chaplin remained what he'd always been, an artist who turned his own contradictions into art that could make you cry and laugh in the same breath. And that brings us back to the point of all of this, not to pry into graves, but to understand the cost of keeping love a secret when the whole world is watching. Conclusion: the price of loving in a house made of mirrors. Old Hollywood built a palace from reflections. On the screen, stars lived 1,000 romances and were forgiven for every one. Off the screen, Some of those same romances had to be hidden under blankets of studio memos and carefully staged photo ops. That wasn't just hypocrisy. It was the business model. Clark Gable and Loretta Young taught us how thoroughly a truth could be re-scripted if the machine had to protect a golden boy and an angelic ingenue. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn taught us that love, even at its purest, sometimes lives best in silence. Marilyn Monroe showed us that when power meets glamour, the result can be a mystery we'll argue about forever. Ingrid Bergman walked into exile and then back into our hearts, proving that talent outlasts judgment. Errol Flynn lived the contradiction out loud. Judy Garland and Tyrone Power showed how tenderness survives in small, secret rooms. Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra burned so hot the town wanted to punish them for it. And Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal left us with a reminder that private heartbreak doesn't need headlines to hurt. Gloria Swanson and Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. revealed what happens when money loves beauty and burns the ledger. Were these affairs mistakes? Sins? Human moments? The truth is messier than the posters ever were. These people weren't archetypes. They were people. They laughed too loud. They kissed the wrong person. They told the truth too late or not at all. They were brilliant at pretending and sometimes terrible at living. That's why we still care. Because behind the lacquered image, we recognize ourselves, the parts of us that want something we're not supposed to want, or love someone, the story says, we shouldn't love. The golden age ended. The contracts changed. The morality clauses lost their teeth. Today's stars can post their relationships, announce their breakups, and crowdsource sympathy in the same afternoon. But say this for the old days. When love had to be hidden, it became intense, risky, and unforgettable. The secrecy itself shaped the feeling, and the danger made it glow. So the next time you watch a classic and see two actors fall for each other while an orchestra swells, remember, the real romance might not be the one you're watching. It might be the one no one was allowed to film, the one that survived in letters, lies, and the space between action and cut. Because in old Hollywood, love wasn't just a plot. It was a scandal, a career risk, a secret worth millions. And sometimes, despite everything, it was real.